The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Valdoria Castle as Queen Isabella hurried through the corridors, her silk slippers making soft whispers against the cold stone. Something was terribly wrong. The servants had been avoiding her eyes for days, and even her most trusted lady-in-waiting, Margaret, seemed nervous whenever Isabella asked questions. Isabella had married King Edmund 3 years ago, not for love, but for the alliance it would bring between the kingdoms of Valdoria and Astoria. Her father, Duke Roderick of Astoria, had arranged the marriage to secure trade routes and military support. What started as a political arrangement had slowly blossomed into genuine affection between the royal couple, or so Isabella had believed. The Queen Consort paused outside the heavy oak doors of the council chamber. Hearing raised voices from within, she recognized her husband's deep baritone, but there were other voices too, his chief advisor, Lord Blackwood, and several members of the royal council. Isabella pressed her ear closer to the door, her heart racing. "The Duke of Astoria has betrayed us," King Edmund's voice boomed through the thick wood. "The intercepted letters prove beyond doubt that he has been secretly negotiating with our enemies in Morgavia. He plans to hand over our northern territories in exchange for gold and military support against our crown." Isabella's blood ran cold. Her father? A traitor? It couldn't be true. Duke Roderick had always been a man of honor, devoted to his family and his people. She gripped the door handle, wanting to burst in and defend her father's name, but something held her back. "Your Majesty," came Lord Blackwood's smooth voice, "we must consider what this means for the Queen Consort. Her entire family has been compromised. Her brother Prince Marcus was seen meeting with Morgavian spies just last week. Her younger sister, Lady Catherine, has been sending coded messages through merchant traders." "No," Isabella whispered to herself, tears springing to her eyes. Marcus and Catherine were innocent souls who cared only for art and music. They would never involve themselves in political scheming. "What do you counsel, Lord Blackwood?" Edmund asked, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine pain. "Complete exile, Your Majesty. The entire Astorian noble family must be banished from Valdoria immediately. They cannot be allowed to remain on our soil where they might continue their treasonous activities. Every member of the Duke's household must go." Isabella's legs nearly gave way beneath her. Exile? Her entire family? Her elderly grandmother? Her young cousins? Her pregnant sister-in-law? All of them? "And what of my wife?" Edmund asked quietly. There was a long pause before Blackwood replied. "The Queen Consort poses the greatest risk of all, Your Majesty. She has access to state secrets, to your private councils, to the very heart of our kingdom. Her loyalty must be questioned above all others." "Isabella has done nothing wrong," Edmund said firmly, but Isabella detected a note of uncertainty in his voice that made her heart shatter. "With respect, Your Majesty, blood runs thicker than water. She is her father's daughter. Can you truly guarantee that she hasn't been feeding information to her family all along? Can you risk the safety of your entire kingdom on the chance that she remains loyal to you rather than to her birth family?" Isabella covered her mouth to stifle a sob. How had everything gone so wrong so quickly? Just yesterday, she and Edmund had walked through the palace gardens together, discussing plans for the upcoming harvest festival. He had kissed her forehead and told her how grateful he was to have her by his side. "The people already whisper, Your Majesty," another council member added. "They say the Queen Consort married you only to spy for her father. They question whether the recent crop failures and the problems with our supply lines might be connected to information she has passed along." "That's enough," Edmund said sharply, but the damage was done. Isabella could hear the doubt creeping into his voice. The way political necessity was slowly overwhelming any personal feelings he might have had for her. "The decision must be made today, Your Majesty," Lord Blackwood pressed. Every moment we delay gives the Astorian family more time to cause damage. Our sources suggest that Duke Roderick is planning to move against us within the month. We must act first." Isabella heard chairs scraping against the floor and realized the council meeting was ending. She gathered her skirts and fled down the corridor, her mind reeling with everything she had heard. By the time she reached her private chambers, she was sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Her lady-in-waiting, Margaret, was waiting for her with red-rimmed eyes. "My lady," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. The guards are coming." "Is it true?" Isabella asked desperately. "About my father. About Marcus and Catherine?" Margaret's silence was answer enough. The older woman had served the royal court for 20 years and had sources of information that even the Queen Consort couldn't access. "There's more, my lady," Margaret said gently. "King Edmund has signed the exile decree. Your entire family is to be escorted to the border before sunset. Ships are waiting to take you all to the neutral territories beyond the Eastern Sea." Isabella sank into her chair, the full weight of her situation finally hitting her. She wasn't just losing her crown or her position, she was losing everything: her home, her husband, her new life, and worst of all, she was being branded as a traitor alongside her family. Did the king ask for me?" she whispered hopefully. Margaret's expression grew even sadder. "He has not left the council chamber, my lady. Lord Blackwood advised that it would be better if you didn't see each other before your departure." The words cut deeper than any sword could have. Edmund couldn't even face her, couldn't even give her a chance to explain or defend herself. After 3 years of marriage, after all the quiet moments they had shared, after all the plans they had made together, he was simply letting her be cast out like a piece of unwanted furniture. A heavy knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Queen Isabella," came a gruff voice, "by order of His Majesty King Edmund, you are to gather your personal belongings and prepare for immediate departure from the kingdom." Isabella stood slowly, drawing on reserves of royal dignity she didn't know she possessed. If she was going to lose everything, she would at least lose it with grace. She wouldn't give the court the satisfaction of seeing her completely broken. But as she began to pack her few precious belongings, letters from her family, a pressed flower from her wedding day, a small portrait of her mother, she couldn't stop the tears from falling. Each item she touched reminded her of a life that was now ending, of dreams that would never be fulfilled. The afternoon sun was already beginning to sink toward the horizon when the guards returned. Isabella had changed into a simple traveling dress, far removed from the elaborate gowns she had worn as Queen Consort. She looked like what she was about to become, just another exile, cast out from the only home she had known for 3 years. As she walked through the palace corridors for the last time, past the tapestries and paintings she had grown to love, past the rooms where she had hosted diplomatic dinners and charity events, past the garden where she had shared so many peaceful moments with Edmund, Isabella held her head high. The servants and courtiers who lined the hallways watched her pass with expressions ranging from pity to suspicion to outright hostility. Some had genuinely cared for her, Isabella realized, but others had never accepted her as their true queen. They had always seen her as the foreign princess who had married their king for political reasons. Now their suspicions seemed justified, even if the truth was far more complicated than any of them understood. The great doors of the castle opened before her, and Isabella stepped out into the courtyard where a carriage waited. She could see other carriages in the distance, presumably carrying her family members who had already been rounded up and prepared for exile. The head of the royal guard, Sir William, approached her with obvious discomfort. He had always been kind to her during her time as Queen Consort, and she could see the conflict in his weathered face. "My lady," he said quietly, "I want you to know that not everyone believes you are guilty of these crimes." "Thank you, Sir William," Isabella replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. "Please, please tell the king that I hope he will be happy, that I hope Valdoria will prosper under his rule." The old knight's eyes filled with unshed tears, and he bowed deeply. "I will, my lady." As Isabella climbed into the carriage that would take her away from everything she had ever known as an adult, she caught a glimpse of a figure watching from a high window in the castle's east wing. Even from the distance, she knew it was Edmund. For a moment, their eyes met across the courtyard, and she thought she saw pain in his expression that matched her own. But then Lord Blackwood appeared beside the king, speaking urgently in his ear, and Edmund stepped back from the window, disappearing from view. The last thread connecting Isabella to her former life had been severed. The carriage began to move, carrying her toward an uncertain future and away from the only man she had ever loved. The carriage wheels rolled steadily over the cobblestone path leading away from Valdoria Castle, each turn taking Isabella further from the life she had known. Through the small window, she watched the familiar landscapes of her adopted kingdom blur past. The rolling hills where she had ridden with Edmund during their courtship, the villages where she had distributed food during the harsh winter, the orchards where they had planned to build a summer retreat. Inside the carriage sat her family members, who had been gathered from various locations throughout the castle and surrounding estates. Her brother Marcus looked pale and confused, his artist's hands still stained with paint from the portrait he had been working on when the guards came for him. Her younger sister Catherine clutched her lute like a lifeline, her usually bright eyes now dulled with shock and fear. Their elderly grandmother, Duchess Eleanor, sat rigid and proud despite her advanced age, but Isabella could see the tremor in her weathered hands. Her cousin Lord James held his pregnant wife protectively, both of them silent with the weight of their sudden misfortune. "Isabella," Marcus said quietly, "what's happening to us?" "The guards wouldn't explain anything except that we were accused of treason." "Treason? I've never even attended a political meeting in my life." Isabella looked at her brother's innocent face and felt her heart break all over again. How could she explain that their father had allegedly been plotting against the crown? How could she tell them that their lives had been destroyed by political games they had never even known were being played? "I don't know all the details," she said carefully, not wanting to burden them with the full horror of what she had overheard. "There have been accusations against father. The king believes our family poses a threat to his kingdom." "Accusations from whom?" demanded Duchess Eleanor, her voice still commanding despite their circumstances. "Your father has served his people honorably for 40 years. He would never betray an alliance, especially one sealed by his daughter's marriage." Before Isabella could respond, the carriage began to slow. Through the window, she could see they were approaching the main gates of the castle complex, the same gates she had passed through as a bride 3 years ago, waving to cheering crowds who had welcomed their new queen consort. Now those same gates stood open like the mouth of some great beast, ready to swallow them and cast them out into exile. Guards lined the pathway, their faces stern and professional, but Isabella noticed that several of them looked uncomfortable with their duty. The carriage stopped just outside the gates, and Isabella heard the driver climbing down from his seat. The door opened, and Captain Morrison of the Royal Guard appeared, his expression carefully neutral. "Your former Majesty," he said, using the formal address for a deposed royal, "you and your family will be transferred to ships waiting at the harbor. From there, you will be transported to neutral territory where you will be free to make new lives for yourselves." Isabella nodded, understanding that this was probably the most kindness they could expect under the circumstances. Captain Morrison had always been fair to her during her time as Queen Consort, and she appreciated that he wasn't treating them with unnecessary cruelty. As she stepped down from the carriage, Isabella's legs felt unsteady beneath her. The reality of their situation was beginning to truly sink in. They weren't just leaving the castle, They were being banished from the entire kingdom. Everything they had ever known, everyone they had ever loved outside their immediate family, was being stripped away from them. Her family members climbed down from their respective carriages, forming a small, frightened group on the road outside the castle gates. Isabella looked back at the towering walls that had been her home, searching for any sign of Edmund. Was he watching their departure? Did he feel any regret about what he was doing to them? "Isabella," Catherine whispered, "I'm scared. What if the ships aren't safe? What if we never see Valdoria again?" "We'll be all right," Isabella said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "We have each other, and we're strong. We'll find a way to build new lives." But even as she spoke the words, Isabella felt the crushing weight of loss pressing down on her chest. She wasn't just losing her crown or her title. She was losing her identity, her purpose, her future. Everything she had worked for as Queen Consort, all the charitable projects she had started, all the diplomatic relationships she had carefully built, all the dreams she had shared with Edmund. It was all being torn away from her. The guards began to form an escort around them, preparing to march them toward the harbor. Isabella took one last look at the castle, and suddenly she saw him. Edmund was standing in the great window of the throne room, his figure dark against the light. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his posture, the way his hands pressed against the glass. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Isabella felt a surge of desperate hope. Maybe he would change his mind. Maybe he would call out to her, run down to the gates, and tell her this was all a terrible mistake. Instead, she saw him turn away from the window, and Lord Blackwood's silhouette appeared beside him, placing a hand on the king's shoulder as if to comfort him, or perhaps to ensure he didn't waver in his resolve. That small gesture, seeing another man comfort her husband while she stood banished and alone, proved to be more than Isabella's fragile composure could bear. The accumulated stress of the day, the shock of betrayal, the terror of an uncertain future, and the agony of losing the man she had grown to love all crashed down on her at once. The world began to spin around her, and Isabella felt her knees buckle. The sounds of her family calling her name seemed to come from very far away. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the concerned face of Captain Morrison reaching out to catch her as she fell. When Isabella regained consciousness, she found herself lying on a rough wooden bench in what appeared to be the castle's guardhouse. Her head was pillowed on Catherine's lap, and her sister was gently stroking her hair while tears ran down her cheeks. "Thank God," Marcus said from somewhere nearby. "We thought you might be seriously ill." Isabella tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced her to lie back down. The castle's physician, Dr. Hartwell, appeared in her field of vision, looking concerned and sympathetic. "Your Majesty, forgive me, Lady Isabella," he corrected himself quickly. "You've suffered from what appears to be nervous exhaustion. The shock of recent events has taken a severe toll on your constitution." "How long was I unconscious?" Isabella asked weakly. "Nearly an hour," Dr. Hartwell replied. "Captain Morrison sent for me immediately when you collapsed. He was quite worried about your condition." Isabella looked around the simple room and realized that her collapse had created an unexpected delay in their exile. The guards were still waiting respectfully outside, but she could sense their impatience to complete their duty and see the former royal family safely on their way to the ships. "I need to get up," Isabella said, struggling to sit upright despite her dizziness. "We can't keep everyone waiting." "My lady," Dr. Hartwell said gently, "perhaps we should postpone your journey until tomorrow. You're in no condition to travel, especially not by sea." "No," Isabella said firmly, though her voice was still weak. "The king wants us gone today, and I won't give him reason to think we're trying to delay or cause problems. We'll leave as planned." As she spoke, Isabella heard commotion outside the guardhouse, raised voices, the sound of rapid footsteps, someone giving urgent orders. Captain Morrison appeared in the doorway, looking troubled. "Lady Isabella," he said carefully, "His Majesty has inquired about your condition. He wishes to know if you require additional medical attention before your departure." Isabella's heart leaped with hope. Edmund was concerned about her? Maybe her collapse had reminded him of their personal connection, of the woman behind the political complications. "Please tell His Majesty that I am recovered and ready to continue our journey," she said, forcing strength into her voice. Captain Morrison hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, but professional discretion held him back. "Very well, my lady. The ships are waiting." As Isabella stood on shaky legs, supported by Marcus and Catherine, she caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror on the guardhouse wall. The elegant Queen Consort, who had started this day, was gone. In her place stood a pale, fragile woman with haunted eyes and trembling hands. But she was still breathing, still standing, still ready to face whatever uncertain future awaited her and her family. If Edmund thought that exiling her would break her completely, he was wrong. Isabella would survive this, even if it killed her to do so. The guards formed up around them once again, and the procession toward the harbor resumed. Isabella kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look back at the castle again. She had said her goodbye to that life when she collapsed at the gates. Now she had to find the strength to build a new one. 6 months had passed since the royal family of Astoria had been forced into exile from the kingdom of Valdoria. They had settled in the neutral coastal city of Serafina, where Duke Roderick had managed to secure modest lodgings using what remained of the family's emergency funds. The grand palaces and luxurious chambers were now just memories, replaced by simple rooms in a merchant's house overlooking the harbor. Isabella stood at her window each morning, watching the ships come and go, always hoping to see familiar colors or hear news from the homeland they had been forced to abandon. Her health had slowly improved since that terrible day when she collapsed at the castle gates, but the vibrant woman who had once charmed foreign ambassadors and organized grand charitable events seemed like a stranger to her now. Her father, Duke Roderick, had aged years in just a few months. The proud man who had once commanded respect across multiple kingdoms now spent his days writing letters to old allies, trying to piece together how everything had gone so wrong. His hair had turned completely white, and deep lines of worry creased his face. "Any word from our contacts in Valdoria?" Isabella asked, as she joined him for their simple breakfast of bread and local cheese. "Nothing reliable," he replied, setting down a letter with obvious frustration. "But there are disturbing rumors, my daughter. Stories that suggest we may not have been the only victims of Lord Blackwood's schemes." Isabella looked up sharply. Throughout their exile, her father had maintained his innocence regarding the treason charges, but the evidence against him had seemed overwhelming. The intercepted letters, the meetings with Morgavian spies, the coded messages, how could all of that have been fabricated? "What kind of rumors?" she asked. Duke Roderick pulled out a crumpled piece of parchment that had arrived with the morning's merchant ship. "This comes from Sir William, the head of Edmund's royal guard. He's been quietly investigating the evidence that was used against us. It seems that several of the key documents may have been forgeries." Isabella's heart began to race. Forgeries? But who would have the skill and access to— "Lord Blackwood himself," her father said grimly. "William believes that Blackwood has been planning this for months, possibly years. He wanted our family removed because we represented a threat to his growing influence over the king." The implications hit Isabella like a physical blow. If the charges against her family were false, then everything they had suffered had been orchestrated by a man they had trusted as Edmund's closest advisor, Worse yet, it meant that Edmund had unknowingly destroyed his own marriage and exiled innocent people based on lies. There's more, Duke Roderick continued. William reports that King Edmund has been troubled since our departure. He barely sleeps, rarely appears at court functions, and has been asking questions about the evidence against us. Blackwood has been working hard to keep him distracted with other matters, but Edmund is beginning to have doubts. Isabella felt a complex mix of vindication and heartbreak. Part of her was relieved to learn that Edmund might be questioning his decision, but another part was devastated that it had taken him so long to do so. How many nights had she lain awake wondering if he ever thought about her, if he ever regretted what he had done? Before she could respond, young Catherine burst into the room, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Isabella, father! You must come quickly! There's a ship in the harbor flying Valdorian colors, and the captain is asking for you specifically." Isabella's heart leaped as she followed Catherine down to the bustling harbor. Sure enough, a medium-sized vessel bearing the blue and gold banners of Valdoria was anchored among the merchant ships. A small boat was rowing toward shore, carrying several figures in familiar uniforms. As the boat reached the dock, Isabella recognized Sir William's weathered face among the passengers. The old knight climbed onto the pier with obvious urgency, his eyes scanning the crowd until he found her. "Lady Isabella," he said, bowing deeply, "I bring word from His Majesty King Edmund. He commands your immediate return to Valdoria, along with your entire family." Isabella felt dizzy, just as she had on that terrible day 6 months ago, but this time from hope rather than despair. "Sir William, I don't understand. Has something changed?" The knight's expression was both relieved and angry. "Everything has changed, my lady. Lord Blackwood has been arrested for treason, forgery, and conspiracy against the crown. The evidence against your family has been proven false. King Edmund is—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Deeply remorseful for the injustice that was done to you all." Duke Roderick stepped forward, his voice carefully controlled. "What evidence was found against Lord Blackwood?" "He was caught attempting to sell state secrets to Morgavia," Sir William replied. "It appears he had been the real traitor all along, using your family as scapegoats to cover his own crimes. The letters implicating Duke Roderick were written in Blackwood's own hand. Though cleverly disguised, the meetings with Morgavian spies were actually Blackwood's own contacts." Isabella sank onto a nearby crate, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was hearing. 6 months of exile, of poverty, of heartbreak and loss, all because one man had been willing to destroy an innocent family to cover his own treachery. "And the king?" she asked quietly. "How is he?" Sir William's expression softened. "Devastated, my lady. He has not been the same since your departure. When the truth came to light, The old knight struggled to find appropriate words. He was overcome with grief and rage. He personally led the investigation into Blackwood's activities and ordered his immediate execution." Isabella closed her eyes, trying to process everything. Edmund had discovered the truth, had avenged the wrong done to her family, but what did that mean for them now? Could they simply return to their old lives as if nothing had happened? Could she trust her heart to a man who had so easily believed the worst about her? "Lady Isabella," Sir William continued, "His Majesty has asked me to convey his personal message to you. He says that he knows he has no right to ask for your forgiveness, that his actions were unforgivable regardless of the lies he was told. But he begs you to return, not as his queen, but simply as yourself. He wants the chance to make amends, to try to rebuild what was destroyed." Isabella looked out at the sea that separated her from Valdoria, from the man who had broken her heart and now wanted to heal it. Part of her wanted to refuse, to make Edmund suffer as she had suffered. But she could see the pain in Sir William's eyes, could hear the genuine remorse in the message he carried. What of Lord Blackwood's fate? Duke Roderick asked. Executed 3 days ago, Sir William replied grimly. His last words were a confession of his crimes and an expression of regret for the harm he caused to innocent people. Isabella stood slowly, her decision crystallizing in her mind. Sir William, please tell His Majesty that we will return to Valdoria, but I want him to understand that trust, once broken, is not easily repaired. Our return does not guarantee forgiveness. The knight nodded, understanding. I will convey your exact words, my lady. As the Astorian family prepared for their journey home, Isabella felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief at their vindication, excitement at the prospect of seeing Edmund again, but also wariness about what the future might hold. Too much had happened for them to simply pick up where they had left off. The voyage back to Valdoria took 3 days, and Isabella spent much of that time standing at the ship's rail, watching the familiar coastline grow larger. When they finally entered Valdoria's harbor, she could see crowds gathered on the docks, not the hostile faces that had watched their departure, but curious, even welcoming expressions. As they disembarked, Isabella saw a familiar figure waiting for them at the end of the pier. King Edmund stood alone, without his usual retinue of advisors and guards, dressed simply and looking older than she remembered. Their eyes met across the crowd, and Isabella saw in his expression a mixture of hope, regret, and desperate longing that matched her own feelings. He approached slowly, as if afraid she might flee, and when he was close enough to speak quietly, he said, Isabella, I know I have no right to ask this, but can you ever forgive me for what I've done to you? Isabella looked into the eyes of the man she had once loved completely, the man who had broken her heart, the man who now stood before her, humbled and repentant. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of possibility. Time will tell, Edmund, she said softly. Time will tell. As they walked together toward the castle, surrounded by her family and the cheering crowds, Isabella realized that sometimes the greatest love stories are not about perfect happiness, but about finding the strength to forgive, to rebuild, and to trust again after everything seems lost. The exile was over. The real work of healing was just beginning.